Hi, welcome to the National Road Heritage Corridors Heritage Stewards Academy. I'm Jen Burden, Director of Cultural Resources for the National Road. In this episode, Wendy Burtner of nonprofit Sidekick discusses board governance, which is something we can all let lapse from time to time, but is important to the stability and longevity of our organizations.
Hi, I'm Wendy Burtner, one of the founders of nonprofit Sidekick, a coaching, consulting, and training firm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm here today to talk about nonprofit governance. So most people think about nonprofit governance, they immediately think about the board, the people involved, but really it's a system. It's a system of your bylaws, your policies, and then the people as well. Your bylaws are kind of like building a house, and you have this lovely house. Then on top of your bylaws, which are kind of the foundational documents, you have policies. And policies are like how you decorate. What paint are you going to put on the wall? What kind of couches are you going to put in there? And then the people come in and just make a mess of everything and start moving the chairs around and repainting and all of that. But every piece of it is very important for this system of governance that we have in the nonprofit sector in the United States. So let's start with the bylaws and we'll work our way up to the people. Bylaws are different for every organization, and it's really important that you read them and you know what they are. They are your governing document for your organization. But for the purposes of this training, I've really pulled out 5 things that I want you to go read your bylaws and look at, because these are the 5 ways that I have found over 30 years in the nonprofit sector that so many organizations are not following their bylaws. So the first one, you probably already know this, is term and term limits for board members. It's really easy for us to be like, oh, Joe's so great, let's leave him on for another year. Or we didn't recruit enough people this year, so we're going to leave Joe on for another year. And that you don't even realize when you're doing that sometimes that you are not following your bylaws, that you're breaking your bylaws at that point. So really important to know, what are your terms? What are the term limits for your board members of your organization? Just some clarification, the term is, how long am I agreeing to be on your board? That might be 2 years, it might be 3 years, it might just be 1 year. And then term limits are, how many times can I re-up? So if it's 1 year, I'm on a board now, it's 1 year and we have no term limits. So just every year, I'm gonna re-up and I'm gonna say, okay, I'm back. Others, it's 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, I can say, yes, I'm gonna come back, but we'll have term limits. So after 2 of those terms of 3 years, then I'm done. I can't come back again, right? It's 6 years total. Really important to see how your organization is structured and how you're supposed to be having terms and term limits for your board members. The second point, some nonprofits will have in their bylaws a description of what their board members, let's say demographics they need to have. They need to be from a certain geographic area, a city, a neighborhood, a state, what have you. Sometimes they have to be from certain organizations that are partners or collaborators or the founders of the organization. Sometimes they'll just say you need, a certain age range, something along those lines. You have to be very careful that you are understanding what they mean and that you're following that. They will also tell you how many people need to be in the room for a quorum. This is something that so many small nonprofits just overlook, but it is very important from a legal aspect. Anytime you are making a decision that affects the entire organization, that you're like taking a vote on, the board is making a decision, you have to have a quorum. Quorum is typically something like 51% of the board members. Sometimes it gives a number. Sometimes your bylaws will say you need to have 10 people in the room or on the phone when you have a vote, or the vote doesn't count. You have to do it another time. And I know a lot of smaller nonprofits, you make decisions on the run. You're not really paying attention to the quorum. But if you ever get challenged for that, if there's ever any legal issues, that's going to come up and that's going to be a real problem for you. So you want to know what your bylaws say in terms of quorum, and make sure that you have that quorum when you make any decision. The third point is the frequency of meetings. And this happens because so many nonprofits, when they start, they write their bylaws that say, we're going to have a meeting every month. So that's great, having a meeting every month. As you grow, as you get staff, you might say, we don't need a meeting every month, but you forget to go back and change those bylaws. So your board might say, we're going to meet quarterly, but you're not following your bylaws then. So you have to change the bylaws. The fourth is kind of new. Since the pandemic, we've all been meeting via Zoom or Teams or whatever your chosen app is. And your bylaws may not cover that. Your bylaws, if you're an older organization, they may actually say you have to be at this address for your meetings. So make sure that you are allowed to have either telephonic or video conferencing meetings, and that should be in your bylaws. The fifth point that I want to make, this is the 5 things again that are most often ways that small, even large organizations are not following their bylaws, is committee structure. And this is similar to the frequency of meetings. When you're new nonprofit, you're going to put in your bylaws, we need these 86 committees. As you grow, as you get staff, as you do things differently, your committees needs change. So you want to go back and you want to check your bylaws and see if you are, again, following them, or have you kind of mushed away from that over the years. And the important thing I want to stress, regardless of how you may not be following your your bylaws, it's really important for you to either change your bylaws to reflect how you are now operating or change your behavior. You always want to follow your bylaws. If ever a legal issue or a PR issue comes up, you do not want it to come up that you're not following your bylaws. It may not feel like a big deal, but it can be in a legal setting or out there in the world as a headline in the newspaper, and that you don't want. Okay, let's move from bylaws to policies, which are organizational level policies is what we're talking about. I'm not talking about paid time off policies or things like that. So the first thing that's very important for a nonprofit organization to have, regardless of how big you are or how small you are in budget or people, is a conflict of interest policy and the annual disclosure. So you want to define your conflict. What does it mean to have a conflict of interest to serve on the board, right? Typically that's if you're a vendor, if you're receiving payment, if you're staff, it's usually something around money, but it could be related. You know, if you're related to a staff person, that might be a conflict of interest as well. So it's really important to point those out. To every year, your board members should be signing that conflict of interest that says, I don't have a conflict, or if I do have a conflict, you want to say, this is the conflict, and you want to describe how you're managing that conflict. So if you have a vendor on the board that is selling you t-shirts and they give you a really great price on the t-shirts, that's great. You get the bids every year. You can easily show that this vendor is giving you, market rate or less. But you can see how somebody might abuse their power and then go the other way and charge you more and make money from it, right? So this is why this conflict of interest policy is very, very important. The second is a whistleblower policy. I think we all know what that is. You certainly can Google and get sample whistleblower policies out there. The important part of this that I want to bring up is making sure that you disseminate it. You want to make sure that all of your board members, all of your volunteers, if you have any staff, that they have copies of it or they know how to get their hands on it. Because think about it. If you are in a position where you're like, somebody is not doing something right and you don't know who to tell, if that person is in a position of power, then chances are you're not going to tell on them, right? You're not going to be that whistleblower. So you have to have that information ready for them, on hand for them. The third, document retention and destruction policy. This really came into effect, if anybody out there can remember the Enron scandal, and they used to talk about, you could hear the paper shredders from miles away. Same idea. You want to have a policy that says this is how long we're going to keep them and this is what we're going to do with them when we're ready to dispose of them. Gift acceptance policy. This doesn't necessarily fit every single nonprofit. This policy can also apply to investments, and it's who do you want to receive money from, who do you not want to receive money from, and who do you not want to invest in. So I was running a breast cancer organization, and we had a lot of conversations about, do we want to accept corporate money, corporate sponsorships from companies that are producing carcinogenic products, whatever that might be. So we had to have a lot of really deep conversations about where do we draw the line on that. For some organizations, you don't care. It's okay. That's okay. I'm not telling you have to care, but if you do, you need to have a policy on it. So the fifth policy that you are supposed to have is executive compensation and benefits review policy. Now, for some of you, you don't have any staff, and that's okay. So you would not need this policy right now. but you want to have it in place before you hire people. And that's really saying this is how we go about setting our executive compensation and benefits. And this is how often we review them and we compare them against other organizations. Are we paying our people appropriately, too much, not enough, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to have a policy in place that says this is how you're doing it. Sixth is your Form 990 review and approval policy. This, I've seen a huge change in this over the course of my career. We now have GuideStar out there, which is now Candid. Every nonprofit's 990 has always been a public document, but now it's available on the website, very quick and easy. So as board members, you want to make sure that there's a policy that you get to look at it, you get to review it. Even if you're not a numbers person, even if it's confusing, you can learn how to read that 990, and you want to be able to approve it. Your name is going on it. As a board member, you are now taking responsibility for this form that's going to the United States government and saying we are accurately reflecting our organization. So it's very important that you review that 990. So you need a policy that says this is how we're going to do it. The second thing I recommend under that policy is that you share that policy with the firm that prepares your 990. If you are big enough to do a 990, even EZ, if you're doing the postcard, that's not a thing. But if you're doing the 990 EZ or the full 990, you want to make sure that you have this policy in place and that the person that's preparing it or the firm that's preparing it knows what your timeline is and what that policy is. So the seventh policy that the IRS is most concerned about in nonprofits is a joint venture policy. They want to know if you are doing any kind of joint venture with another organization or corporation. They're most interested in the money, right? They don't want somebody using a nonprofit or the nonprofit status to kind of, money launder, money wash, whatever. So they want to know if you have a joint venture with another organization, how that works. They want to be able to say, hey, what's going on here? All 7 of these are questions on the full 990 that you have to say, yes, we have this policy, or no. That's the extent of the IRS's oversight right now. As public charities, that's kind of where the IRS is saying, we are saying that the public gets this information, and that's how we are kind of providing that oversight. It's more of a public oversight than an IRS oversight for that. So very important that you at least consider these policies for your organization. Again, you smaller organizations, you may not need them right now, but once you get big enough that you are doing a 990, you're going to be asked about them, and donors and funders, foundations do look at them, probably government agencies too, do look at your 990. So you want to make sure that you have this accurate. Okay, so we have our bylaws and our policies. We've got the house, we've got it decorated, we're ready to move the people in and really take off with this organization and govern. So why do nonprofits have boards to begin with? I get asked this question all the time. And a lot of times I get asked the question by people who say, I want to start a nonprofit. And the short answer is because you are considered a public entity, you are considered a public charity, and you are considered tax exempt. Any money going into you is exempt from taxes, from income tax. So the IRS says, hey, we need some kind of mechanism in place to make sure that these are well run, that people aren't, again, fraudulently using a nonprofit status and taking advantage of the taxpayers. They are there to protect the taxpayers. So a board of a nonprofit is there to provide public accountability and transparency. This is for the money as well as the mission, because we can't get nonprofit status without a community benefit, without that mission. So the board, that's the 2 things that boards should be looking at all the time. How are we doing with the money? Are we managing it well? Are we being transparent about it? And how is the mission? Are we serving our mission? Are we doing things towards the mission? That's, in a nutshell, why we have to have boards. So I mentioned earlier about board member conflict of interest, and this comes down oftentimes to independence. And I really wanted to talk about this here because I know a lot of people watching this are from very small nonprofits. So you probably say, I'm going to get my brother on board, I'm going to get my uncle. It's a kind of a small group of people that come together. But it's very important for you to understand that the best practice for this is about 2/3, half to 2/3 of your members should be independent. So that means they're free of a conflict of interest. They're not compensated any money, or not compensated more than $10,000 technically. They're not compensated as an employee of the organization. They're not related to anybody who is compensated by the organization. So a lot of this is around money. Again, they're watching to make sure that the money's handled appropriately. So again, you want to have at least half to 3/4 of your board members to be independent board members, that there's no conflict, there's none of that. Because you are a governing board. You're not an advisory board. Oftentimes people get on boards because they think they're going to be able, they're really, really interested in history, environment, whatever. That's great. You want them on the board, but they need to understand that now they are responsible. So that is a governing board. You might have advisory boards that do different things, but the governing board is what we're here to talk about today. And these are the really important people that are, being accountable and being that public transparency. They are fiduciaries of the organization. A fiduciary is a person that is acting on behalf of another person or persons with legal and ethical obligations to put that person's interest ahead of their own. Now, in this case, we're not talking about people, we're talking about an organization. So when you join a board, you are going to be acting on behalf of the organization and putting that organization's interests ahead of your own. So what are the 3 duties? When you become a board member, there are 3 legal duties that you are saying, I'm going to uphold these 3 duties. The first is the duty of care. And that means that you are going to actively care for the organization. You're going to participate in making decisions. You're going to make sure that organization has a balanced budget, that you have enough money coming in to do what you need to do. And you're also going to be making sure that that organization is still aligned with their mission, that no mission creep is happening. They're not doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. You're going to be caring for that organization. The second is the duty of loyalty. This goes back to the conflict of interest and board member independence that we just talked about. And that means when you're sitting in the chair and you're getting ready to make decisions for the organization, that you are considering the organization's best interests. You're not saying, it would be better for me, for my brother, for my employer, anything like that. It's always what is best for the organization. And sometimes that might not align, particularly if you're not an independent board member. So you have to be able to say, I can't have this conversation, I can't be part of this decision. And you may leave the room, or you might just sit back and say, I'm not going to be part of the discussion and decision. Back to the example I gave about the vendor, anytime the board talked about t-shirts, for example, like what we were saying, that person should not be in the room, or they at least should not be part of the conversation about how much money to spend on t-shirts that year, because it clearly was benefiting him. So the third is your duty of obedience. And this is kind of where the buck stops with the board. The board is the final kind of authority for making sure that the organization is following all laws, all regulations, you're staying within your mission. If you are a subsidiary, or if you have a national organization that you have to report up to, that you're following whatever those regulations or rules are. So the board is the one who has to be the final, like we are making sure of all of this. So board members asking, are we following these laws? Are we submitting our 990? Is what you're supposed to be doing. You are supposed to be making sure that that organization is following all of the laws. So you have duty of care, caring for the organization, duty of loyalty, making sure that you're putting the organization first while you're caring for the organization, and duty of obedience, making sure that that organization is, in line with laws, regulations, and its mission. So what you're hearing me say is absolutely, the board is legally accountable for nonprofits' actions. So you're not an advisory board, you're a governing board, and that means you are accountable for this organization. You may have staff, they're not gonna, you are the final accountability. You're the buck stops here. And I think that comes as a shock to some people who are board members. There are some ways you can, generally speaking, you can manage that risk. And so I just want to quickly bring up that there are 3 kinds of insurance that you should have: general liability, professional liability, and directors and officers. These insurance policies will protect boards, will protect you as a board member, as an individual. Of course, these days you can't offer 100% protection off of anything, but this is just really good governance to have these 3 insurance policies in place. Another way you can manage risk is by engaging. Pay attention. Read all the reports. Ask the questions as they come up. Don't be shy. Make sure you're looking at it and going, that doesn't seem right. Don't doubt yourself. Ask the question. You may be wrong, but you're supposed to be in there. You need to understand the expectations of your position and then maintain open communications with other board members, with other staff, with the board officers, whatever that might be, making sure that you really understand what's going on with that organization. And you can raise a red flag if you need to. A lot of board members are disengaged and they just don't even see the red flags when they're coming down the pike. So very important, don't be shy is the value on that one. Let's talk about 3 types of governing boards. You have working boards, guiding boards, and institutional boards. Small organizations where they don't have any staff have working boards. Somebody is doing the work and it's usually the board, right? So many of us, that's what we do. We roll up our sleeves and we get stuff done. On the other side of the continuum is an institutional board. These are usually larger organizations, or as the name implies, institutions. And the boards are really up here governing. They're not bookkeeping. They're not running the programs. They're not, doing any of that kind of hands-on work. They are up here. A lot of times they're focused on fundraising because that's a big requirement of an organization, that we have money coming in the door. And lots of times the board is the one that's helping us do that fundraising. In between working and institutional is this guiding. And I think maybe 80% of the organizations that I know of that I work with are in this guiding category. And the guiding boards are kind of a mishmash. So they're still doing some of the work. You might still have your treasurer doing the bookkeeping, for example. But you have an executive director now, or you have program support that's really running those programs, or vice versa. So the guiding is really a mishmash of the two. But it's important to know where you are. It's important for the entire board to agree where you are on this continuum, and that you're operating as if that. Because if you are an institutional board and you have a board member who thinks it's a working board, there's going to be some conflict, right? So you have to agree, this is where we are. All right, let's talk about your roles. We talked about your duties, your legal duties. So if you show up and you do those 3 things, you should be okay. But, we really typically have more expectations of our board members. The first is to be a team member and mission expert. So you take the time to learn about the organization. You take the time to build relationships with staff or volunteers or other people. You take the time to really learn about that organization. What are they doing? How are they doing it? Right? You start to use that we language. We're all in this together. We do this. That's one of the things that I look for on new board members when they make that turn and start using the we language. Then they're becoming a team member. The second is ambassador. So once you get your feels in there and you feel really good that you know what's going on and you're a good team member, you're proud of the affiliation, you're out there talking about it, you're bringing people into the organization. And for some of us, just simply sharing social media posts can show that you're a good ambassador. But really think about how can I put this out there that I am really proud of this organization? I'm part of this organization. That's what ambassadors do. The fourth is boards and fundraising. And I have to say this is different for every organization. Some organizations, the boards are doing all the fundraising. Some organizations, they are not doing all the fundraising. But I think every board member should participate in fundraising in some way. You might go out and make the ask, as we say. You might bring all your friends together and say, can you guys contribute to this organization? Great, do that. You might host a party in order to do that. That is fantastic. Maybe you know individuals that can give more money and you're going to go ask them. That's great. Some of us are not cut from that cloth. Some of us don't do that. So maybe you can make thank you calls. Maybe you can write thank you letters. Maybe you can help keep a calendar of how the fundraising is working. Where are we going now? What's our next event? That type of thing. There are all kinds of ways that board members can participate in fundraising. And so I would encourage you to do that. One of the easiest ways for you to participate in fundraising is not asking. It's just, again, being a really good ambassador, sharing the stories, talking about the impact, bringing people in. Then at some point, somebody's going to ask them, or they're going to see that social media post and they're going to be ready to give. So that's cultivation. That is part of fundraising. So figure out how you can best participate in fundraising as a board member, and do whatever is your strength. The fourth role for board members are financial leaders. And I know I've talked about this quite a bit already, but it's very important that even if you are not a financial person, that you know and understand the numbers. Where's the money coming from and where is it going? That is number one. That's the best thing you can do in terms of being a financial leader. Now, you also should be looking forward. The board should be paying attention to what's happening next year. Are we going to get the same amount of money? What are our projections for our income and our expenses, and do they make sense? You want to make sure that the budget makes sense for the organization for that year. Don't just say, yes, it looks great. It looks the same we've done every year. You want to make sure it makes sense. Look at it with a critical eye. And then I always tell smaller organizations, when you get to a point where you can staff it professionally, this should be one of the first places that you staff. I think a lot of times small organizations go to fundraising and say, we're going to staff fundraising first. And so that might be the case, but a close second, if not the first, should be financial management. You want to make sure that that is clean, that it's honest, there's no fraud, and all of that. The best way that you as a board member can assure that that's happening is by having a professional keep your books, do your accounting, etc. So overall, when you think about the board's role, it's really putting on like this running partners on a mission hat. And I think of a running partner as somebody who we go out for a run and they're going to say, you know what, Wendy, you're getting red in the face. We need to sit down, or here's some water. Like your partners, you're supporting each other along the way, but you're also holding each other accountable. Right? So you're saying, hey, we said we were going to do this, let's do this, right? So whether it's board, staff, volunteer, whatever, you have to hold each other accountable along the way as well. So there's support and accountability when we talk about running partners on a mission. And that's really how you should be thinking about a board role. So overall today, we talked about the governance system, the bylaws, policies, and people. And then we talked a lot about the roles and responsibilities of the board of directors. I hope I covered everything from small to larger organization, and I know there are going to be other videos on this topic in this series, but thank you so much for watching today.